Okay. Hi. I'd like to just start out by just putting up my abstract on the top here, because I think the questions that I raise, I hope I will touch most of them. I asked the question in my abstract, does intertextuality, IT, have to be intentional on the part of the author? If author intent is the criteria for IT and not reader determined, does the author deliberately allude to one or more texts so that the audience will have a new way of seeing, hearing as a result of how the texts interact with each other? Very important to me is, will there be a message as a result of the interaction? I'm going to introduce rabbinic midrash as part of, and I justify using rabbinic midrash, which does juxtapose what often seems to be unrelated biblical text and produces a new text. And the premise I always follow is, when I'm looking at text, is that we have a synchronic dialogue, not necessarily a diachronic dialogue. I'm not interested in diachronic dialogues. I'm not even sure if there is. A few people, as I quote, Ellen Van Volde, who argue that IT is demonstrable relationships between texts. Robert Alter sees texts in restless dialogue with one another. And Joachim Krauss writes that if a biblical author intends to make allusions to another text, he or she has in all likelihood inserted features which point towards that intertext. I am going to argue that there is authorial intent in Judges 19 to allude to a multitude of texts. And so therefore it's necessary to differentiate between the strength of the internal allusions in the text. For instance, there are clear lexical, semantic, and thematic elements which connect Genesis 34, Exodus 18, 1 Samuel 11, Hosea 2, Judges 19, 2 Judges 19. And these elements, I argue, are strongest in texts, obviously, of Genesis 19, less obvious perhaps to you, but hopefully at the end of my paper, to Genesis 24, Judges 9, and 2 Samuel 13. One can argue that the strength of the IT in the latter texts is that they exhibit authorial intent. Jordan Sheets, in a doctorate that he wrote, the concept of canonical intertextuality, which he wrote about the book of Daniel, introduces the idea of canon, that there is canonical intertextuality, which speaks of the reality that certain texts have been intentionally placed together. And the term intertextuality speaks of the dialogue inherent in the canonical text because of the canon and canonical process. Some random thoughts that I have on canonization and allusion, which I just wrote up in the process of writing this paper, which is that it's recently occurred to me that the whole concept of canonization is a form of invitation to a group of books to be in contact with each other, a sort of WhatsApp group like today, in which we constantly chatter with one another, know each other well, make explicit and inexplicit allusions all the time, have in-jokes, send pictures of each other. It's an exclusive club. To me, the book of Deuteronomy, which is basically a midrashic retelling of the Exodus story after it's being found, is the first book to infiltrate this canon. And once there is both alluded to, which we just saw in the previous paper, and also alludes to other earlier books, which we also saw in an earlier paper. Later retellings continue this practice, but don't make it into the canon. Finally, which I will be talking about soon, is Midrash continues to do this in an explicit manner by pointing to and linking phrases, words, concepts, plots, etc. In Jonathan Culler's words, intertextuality is a designation of a work's participation in the discursive space of a culture. And for me, space can also be understood as neighborhood, which I think is also important in the canon. For instance, as part of my canon, my neighborhood is the Hebrew Bible, which does not include the New Testament. Also, in addition to what is often referred to as Tanakh, there's not only Torah Bichtav, the written Torah, but also Torah Ba'al Peh, which includes Midrash, Talmud, etc. An example of Midrash, which affects our text that I'm going to look at with Judges 19, is the case of BT, Babylonian Talmud, Gittin, 6b to 7a. Commenting on the text, which is in Judges 19, and his concubine played the harlot against him, Rabbi Aviatar said that the Levite found a fly with her, and Rabbi Yonatan said that he found a hair on her. Afterwards, Elijah comes into it, we could skip that. The Levite found a fly and excused it. He found a hair and did not excuse it. Rabbi Judah explained he found a fly in his food and a hair in loco concubitus. The fly was merely disgusting, but the hair was dangerous. Some say he found both in his food. The fly was not her fault, the hair was. Rabbi Hista said a man should never terrorize his household. The concubine of Gibeah was terrorized by her husband, and she was the cause of many thousands being slaughtered in Israel. So, incidentally, yesterday I heard a paper, and I may refer to it at the end if there's time, but clearly to me and the rabbis, it's the concubine who was not to blame. She did not play the harlot, in quotes, Sana, she did not do that. And in fact, she ran away because she was terrorized by her husband. And so the Midrash is doing some intertextuality with this. And of course, as a result of her being terrorized, terrible things happen. The husband may have intercourse with the wife, and she may serve him unkosher food, and she may turn on lights on Shabbat, so that's a problem. Another example is the quotation from the song, thy cheeks are comely with circlets, thy neck with peers. Rabbi Levi said, this is exactly a definition of intertextuality. Rabbi Levi said in the name of Rabbi Hanina, this refers to the various sections of the Torah which are linked to one another, or lead on to one another, or leap to one another, or show analogies to one another, or are related to one another. This is a quote from Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Rabbah, from the Midrash. And I found this quotation, I think that's where I found it, in the article by Gershon Helpner, who wrote about verbal resonance in the Bible and intertextuality. And he points out, despite what I've just pointed out to you here, is biblical scholars continue to use the word midrashic pejoratively. And I think that is a terrible mistake. Another quotation that I have here is from a review of Judy Klitzner, who does wonderful, wonderful work on intertextuality in her book, Subversive Sequels in the Bible, how biblical stories mine and undermine each other. In his review, he writes that if contemporary readings in any age are a reflection of the issues and values of that individual and that age, rather than an effort at faithful recovery of the elusive original intent of an ancient document. And I think that we're not going to be able to ever find, and I think this was pointed out in some of the papers yesterday, we're never going to be able to find the original intent of an ancient document. And as modern readers, we will probably either ignore that and read it through our own lenses, or we might try to seek the author's original intent, and then we talk about authorial content. So I asked the question, is it possible to determine what is authorial intent? And Timothy Sandoval, in again, a review of Catherine Dell and Will Kine's edited book, Reading Proverbs Intertextually, writes that that there are long-standing methodological questions in historical, critical, biblical studies, and this really complicates the issue of authorial intent. And they ask, should we be content to appeal to a broad notion of intertextuality and synchronic analysis to warrant our claims about debates and dialogues between literary works? Or should we be content to look at a broad notion of intertextuality and diachronic analysis, that conversation and debate happens while at the same time remaining agnostic about the question of which text or author influenced the other? So now we come to Judges 19, which I argue is a self-contained text. It engages in dialogue with other texts, and it gains new meaning as well as offering commentary on the intertext. I talked about strong intertextuality, and I have here a quick chart that we could look at, but I'm going to go into more detail as far as this is concerned. I talk about very weak intertextuality, weak, medium strength, strong, and very strong. Okay, so I have different categories here of the strength of these. Okay, so an example of very weak intertextuality would be the use of the word vayifsar bo vayikach when Esau meets Jacob on the way to Canaan, or the case of vayifsar bo lakachat vayima'en, or these would be examples of the use of a similar word, but it really is just a word. It's very weak. There's some intertextuality there, and if I wanted to argue it, I could even argue for more, but I'm not going to. Or, for instance, the smoking oven in Genesis 15:10, where you have vayibater otam batavach, chopping up animals, which reminds us of Saul's chopping up the animals. But here it's very, very weak intertextuality. That I call, very weak intertextuality. Now I have what just simply is weak intertextuality, which is achaya, cutting the Jeroboam's dress into 12 pieces, which is of course similar to the 12 pieces of the woman. You have a rival monarchy and there's no king, but again, it's not enough to justify talking of this as strong intertextuality. Another example is Abraham's hospitality to angels, which I will come back to, and perhaps in the context that I want to look at, perhaps it's stronger, but not overboard through the whole text. Medium strong intertextuality would be examples in Hosea, where you have Hosea, a direct reference to what happened in Gibeah, or in 2 Samuel 11, when you have repeated use of the word by Yishlach, which or David getting others to do his dirty work, and you have again some intertextuality there, but again it's medium strong. Or the whole idea of the inverse of hospitality in 2 Sam 12, and there, if I wanted to argue, and since hospitality is going to be a very important issue here in my paper, I could argue that this has some intertextuality, especially since the word la-oreach appears here, and the word oreach only appears in 2 places, and one is here in 2 Sam 12 and in Judges 19. We come now to strong intertextuality, and here we have Hosea's wife, and there's lots of repetitions. The root is zanah, naval, zaber el-lev, the whole irony of eternal marriage. We have that in Hosea 2. We have it in Exodus 18. We have male bonding, where the father-in-law in both cases are called chotain, and the father-in-law is sent off at end, shalach. So we do have strong intertextuality here. And of course, the story of Genesis 34, where you have again, Daber Alev, Nevala, and Zonah, and you have your terrible rape, depending on how you read it. Anyway, you have a rape, which are therefore, and after which, where you have the cruelty of the brothers to the rapist, and you could have similar to what happens where you have overkill as a result and a call for revenge. So you could argue that this is strong intertextuality here. Another example of strong intertextuality would be Abraham taking 1 donkey and 2 boys to sacrifice his son Isaac. You have it's full of contrasts: 1 boy, 2 donkeys. Isaac is referred to Na'ar, the concubine Na'ara. You have the cleaver, the Ma'achelet, lifting the eyes up, the Deus ex machina of the emasculated Isaac versus the Pelegish, who's not saved here. And at the end, you have a Pilegesh mentioned at the end of the story, which you have at the end of Genesis 22. And you can also argue the same thing with the book of Ruth, that you have here several instances, including a mother-in-law, and also the Ruth in holding Ahaz. You have quite a few things here, and also Linu. Okay, and the last one is 1 Sam 11, where you have the pieces of meat cut up and sent to all tribes. And this is, most people usually allude to this as, especially because the tribe of Benjamin is not being destroyed here. So you could have, and perhaps the, okay, anyway, let's go on. And now we have very strong intertextuality. And I'm bringing in here, it's not my example, it's Mika Baal's example with Jephthah's daughter. And she has an article. I refer you to the article if it interests you. And in terms of Mika Baal, this is very strong intertextuality. And she has written about this. And if you want, this is the article. It's in Alice Bach's Woman in the Hebrew Bible. Another example, of course, is exceedingly strong intertextuality. I'm sure you'll be waiting for me to say this, of course, Genesis 19. But even Genesis 19 has a problem because it's a small section. It's not the whole, it's not throughout the section, but you can't really see the intertextuality except for a small part of the text. And finally, not finally, there's 2 more examples. You have the rape of Tamar, and you have this, a lot of the words repeat here. You have Nivala, you have the contrast of Tamar having a strong voice as opposed to the concubine who has no voice. You have words like lo ava and yechezak. You have words like that. Locking the door, you have the contrast of the concubine who puts her hands on the door. You have a lot of issues here in 2 Sam as well. And finally, I come to my text, which is where I see exceedingly strong textuality, which is, for me, crucial. And just before I come to the text, you have many similar words here. Teven v'mishpo, Teven v'mispo, and you have the repetition of the word of the root lun. You have attempt to delay leaving of the person, the servant or the master. You have the contrast of the word shalach used over and over, contrast of hospitality, and you also have the foil of a strong woman, Rebecca, versus a passive woman who is the concubine. And you also again have lifting eyes, and you also have the falling off of the camel at the end when Isaac is seen by Rebecca. And you also have the concubine being put on the man's donkey at the end of the story. If I want to let the text speak for themselves, you have Daber Alev, you have Nivala, and you have Ma'achelet. I've written papers on all of these. Phyllis Tribble noted the very clear intertext of Daber Alev. I've written a paper on the concubine of Gibeah, the case for reading intertextuality, where I talk about the phrase Daber Alev. And you have Nivala, the outrage, which appears in at least 5 texts. Every time the word appears, a terrible outrage happens. And there are many examples of that. And of course, the Ma'achelet, which is the cleaver, and Yaira Amit writes that the use of the Ma'achelet echoes the Akedah story. She writes that the author's use of the word Ma'achelet, meaning the consuming sword, results in the portrayal of Abraham as a slaughterer. In a midrash in Genesis Rabbah, the word Ma'achelet is not a consuming sword, but simply the knife which renders the meat fit to eat. The knife that both Abraham and the Levites take is also the type used for animal sacrifice. Keep in mind, the Levites might be at this time when there's possibly engaging in sacrifice. Okay, When we look at hospitality, and this is the crucial issue, is lina, the hospitality. What you have here is a major theme, the inverse of hospitality. There is hospitality or lack of it on about 4 levels. First of all, hospitality is a family trait, lavished, displayed by Abraham and Sarah, and performed perfunctorily by Lot in Sodom. Rebecca runs around, brings water to the camels. Her brother invites a stranger into their home, gives him lavish hospitality, water, straw, feed, whatever he wants. The next is the Judges 19 text, which makes a major social commentary when the Levite finds himself on the street with no one to give him a place to stay, and this society is corrupt, which is similar, by the way, of course, to the Lot story. And finally, that you have here the old man who gives him a place. However, even this man is corrupt because later on he gives his virgin daughter and the guest concubine to the town to save the necks of his guests, which is an inversion of hospitality. Again, there is no deus ex machina, unlike the story of Lot, to save the woman who's sacrificed. I have here some charts. I'll show you them quickly just to show you. You can't really read them, but I just want you to see what really stays prominently is the linu, right? Linu, lalin. And I'm going to give you one that's a little clearer. I just want to show you these. These are my master charts. And again, lin, and you have here a lot of intertextuality. Every time you see colors, there's intertextuality. And so just to make it a little bit clearer here, in Judges 19, you have here following the order of judges. So you have here in Judges 19, Levi took to himself a concubine, all right? Vayikach lo isha pileget, and in Breshit, in Genesis, you have kach v'lech ati isha leben adonecha, and you have here master appearing there a couple of times. You could just look here. I don't think I have that much time. I could keep this on here for a few minutes, but you have here very, very strong intertextuality, and I'll be happy to. I guess I should have shared this with all of you. But and then it continues. You have here more of the same here, where it's clear to me that these two texts are in dialogue with each other. Is there authorial intent? All right. There are so many similarities and so many contrasts here, and the question is: clearly, there's dialogue. Is there authorial content? I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure if there is or isn't, that there is a relationship between the two texts, that the Judges 19, which is clearly a learned text, is aware of Rebecca. To me, it's almost a commentary. It's almost saying to Rebecca, you've crossed borders. You could have been dumped in, someplace, but you could have been raped and thrown away, and it didn't happen to you. You could have had what happened to the concubine. It could have happened to you. And by the way, the Midrash picks up on that. The Midrash picks up on the danger to Rebecca, because the Midrash actually points out that Eliezer, or the servant, had a chance to take advantage of Rebecca, but did not, and she has to even prove it. How does she prove it? When she falls off the donkey, not the donkey. When she falls off the camel, her virginity is affected, and she falls off the camel, and there's a little blood there, and the angel Gabriel comes and he shows this little spot of blood. So here you have intertextuality coming back again to the Midrash, pointing out to the danger of and one last thing is, I wrote my paper way before coming across a wonderful article which I recommend to you by David Penchansky. It's called "Staying the Night: Intertextuality in Genesis and Judges. It's a wonderful, I'll highlight it here for you so you can see it. It's a wonderful article, and he makes a lot of points that I make. I don't always agree with him, but I found his paper after my paper was written. I tried to integrate it when I could, but he has two interesting themes here. And one is what he calls the delayed guest and the threatened guest, right? So you might want to look for that article and find it. And finally, yesterday, do I stay on my time? I'm just looking at the time. I have another 2 minutes. Yesterday I went, I believe that I believe he's here, Bartosz Adams, whatever, I can't pronounce your name, but he talked yesterday about Othniel and the unfaithful concubine. And he gave a paper on this in one of the sections. And but his premise is that the concubine was to blame. She was a zamna, she was unfaithful. If that's your premise, I mean, if that was his premise, then it's possible to argue that this is also a strong intertextual. But if I disagree with that premise, which I do, then I would not consider that to be authorial intent. I'm not denying the conclusions of his paper, but I would not see that as authorial intent to make the connections between the two. He might want to argue that. I think he's here, but I don't. That's not the point. So I think I've gotten to my full 30 minutes, or a little bit less, but that's it. Okay. I see that you're smiling. He's here.